Hello and
Right.
welcome to Von Vlog. And we are here with Nicolas D. Villarreal. Nico is probably my longest, most repeated guest. So I don't know if you've actually got the most guest spots, but you're up there. But you've also come on since the show started independently 5 years ago. And I've gotten to watch you grow intellectually. We are talking about whatever happened to post-liberalism, or what I would call post-liberalism's strange dissolution. And I'm not going to say death, because I'm not even sure it died. Like, it just
it's in the process. It's getting there.
just sort of melted away. And we're going to talk about this in the time of Bonapartism as super farce, as we were talking before the show. We're living in a time where, like, you can't predict how, like, I feel like the most satirical Thomas Pynchon novel feels a little bit undercooked now compared to what's actually happening. Like, in fact, Crying Lot seems a lot more plausible than what we're living through. And yet, it's also all predictable. It's just, what's unpredictable about it is how stupid it's actually happening. It's like everything that I've ever thought might happen in this scenario, but dumber. And I just want to ask you before we get into this. I was told that Trumpism was going to be an ideology of post-liberalism, and I don't see how it is. But how do you respond to that? And I guess we have to define what post-liberalism is anyway.
Sure. Well, in terms of what post-liberalism is, there's a bunch of different doctrines. In general, like there's people like Curtis Yarvin and Patrick Deneen who have these ideas about what they have in common is basically two things. They have this critique of liberalism, usually associated with like liberal elite institutions that are run by educated professionals, and they really don't like this, whatever tendencies come out of that, whatever ideologies are associated with that, and they also the reasons for that vary. Like Patrick Deneen really doesn't like the elitism aspect of it, of that the underclass is being neglected in some way. Although he has like this particular view of the underclass, like the views, like what they really wanted, like these eternal like truths that are obviously found in Catholic doctrine. And for Yarvin, it's just that they're like incompetent and bad and evil or whatever. And he, like Yarvin wants a monarchy. Patrick Deneen wants something he calls mixed constitution, which is just like elites that have more noblesse oblige and stuff like that, that actually represent the different classes in society, but aren't actually necessarily of that closed classes. And the post-liberalism, the other thing it has in common, like all the different doctrines, is that they all embraced Trump, basically. They all embraced this idea of the necessity of just doing whatever the big guy in charge says. And that this was the problem with Trump's first administration, right? And that kind of going along with this authority and whatever excess or what moment of exception that comes with it is what will get us out of liberalism. But both of all of them weren't necessarily meant to, they never spoke for Trump himself. Obviously, Trump is we were talking, he's kind of like a Bonapartist figure. And as I wrote in this unpublished article, that like the post-liberal thinkers are all kind of like have these historical kind of analogies in the way they operate to like the figures that preceded Bonaparte a bit. Like Yarvin's idea of monarchy is very similar to the monarchy of like Louis Philippe, the king of France.
Mhm.
Basically, the parliament, it was full of all like the bourgeois bankers and stuff like that. They just decided he's going to be in charge.
Mhm.
And it was very arbitrary and nobody really liked it, but he was put like Garvin's whole thing is like, oh, we'll have a group of shareholders that decide who's in charge or whatever. And that's basically what happened in France. Everyone hated it. It did not go well. And he got chased out of the country like the Bourbons before him. And then Deneen's whole thing, I mean, the provisional government after Louis Philippe got kicked out was very much in this mold of Deneen's idea of mixed constitution, even down to like the social Catholic teachings.
Mhm.
Lamartine, the guy who headed the provisional government, he even like spoke to that and was very like basically everything that Deneen wanted was in this guy and his rhetoric. And he failed spectacularly. He got like 0.25% in the presidential election when Bonaparte won.
Mhm.
And obviously, the Second French Republic did not end well. The Party of Order, which was composed of like the moderate Republicans and the monarchists, and basically the party of the bourgeoisie, they really just represented bourgeois interests and cracked down on all the left wing and the proletariat in order to maintain that. So all of them kind of what they have is a Bonaparte, but what they want is like these other pre like professional like liberalism that existed but also failed because they don't know about its history of failures. They never bring those things up.
Well, this is one of the things that I find so interesting. For people who are supposedly offering a pre-enlightenment model, they're all pulling to early liberal enlightenment models that were
Exactly.
that could not compete
Mhm.
with bourgeois parliamentarism, basically. Um, I guess Deneen is a little bit harder to pin down because for all of his complaints about liberalism, he basically offers a liberal version of Catholic distributism. That's how I've always interpreted what he's doing.
Yeah.
Which is awfully close to integralism, which is awfully close to Italian fascism, but like he's not gonna say that.
Mhm.
um, but these people were all the rage 4 or 5 years ago, and even during the early Biden administration, they were big influences on the national conservative movement. Another movement that seems to have mostly dissolved in light of Trump returning.
Mhm.
I find that interesting. How much dissolution of Trump won. I mean, we could talk about like this a dissolution of all the counter forces on him, like Ivanka and the old Republican establishment. But there's also a dissolution of key parts of Trumpist ideology this time around. Like
Yeah.
we are more with a purely demagogic figure with no clear ideology whatsoever.
I mean, this is explicit where like Yarvin came out and said just a few weeks ago that like, yeah, everything failed when like Doge and Trump didn't blow up everything and start over in like the first week or something. But it was like, but he was cheering it on for way longer than that.
Mhm.
He like at his heart, Curtis Yarvin is just a partisan hack, but it really became clear that like people were not buying into this anymore because of just how stupid everything Trump was doing was. I mean, the trade war, the stuff that the way that ICE is doing it now, and Jerome Powell going after him, it's
Mhm.
just the most stupid things that anyone who has any awareness of what's going on would understand. Even the Epstein stuff too, and now like people like Marjorie Taylor Greene are disillusioned. Um, And I think this is also slightly why people like Nick Fuentes are kind of picking up in popularity among these people, among like Republican staffers and in that type of milieu, because like the people they turn to as like intellectual heavyweights and guiding lights basically brought them to where they are, and where they are isn't working, and that's basically.
Not to be too speculative, we can come back to your article here, but it does feel like I'm either going to watch J.D. Vance or Marco Rubio eventually do a Khrushchev moment after after Marco Rubio or J.D. Vance like bury a Khrushchev one another. I'm not sure who's who in that analogy. But I mean, it feels like that. I mean, really does feel like that. You're just like, oh, the next person's going to come from this regime that it's probably one of the kiss-ass toadies now, but they're going to pivot away from most of this. Now, Vance has doubled down on the racial nationalism. So ironically, even though all the figures of the alt-right have gone away, they seem to have won amongst the under 20-something weirdos in the GOP, but that also seems to be alienating a whole lot of people from the GOP.
Yeah. I mean, it's ironic because those are like some of the really unpopular stuff, like the ICE kind of crackdowns and whatnot, are the stuff that these people like, what those people like in particular, and will double down and defend. On the other hand, when you look at people like Rubio, and it's still just all about like we got to get crush these left-wing governments in South America or whatever.
It's just neoconservatism in one or two hemispheres.
Yeah.
So
it's looking pretty bleak for them. And honestly, like this is like I saw this pretty early. Like once Liberation Day happened, I was like, these people are discredited forever. Like basically the post-liberal thinkers, because they in particular, like in a world where like young people in particular aren't being socialized very well, that these people basically socialized a generation of young right-wingers to just obey the authority at the top and never think for themselves. And that's why all these things are being allowed to happen, basically.
What I'm more interested in some ways is like, how deep is this? Like, if like, for example, we all know that J.D. Vance has the charisma of a pile of dog shit, but he is smart and he is a weasel.
Yeah.
And because we're talking about a guy who's now picking up every talking point. I mean, he sounds like he's like actually trying to go further than Trump and in his justifications, but he sounds slimy doing it even to a lot of the conservative base. And it also seems like, when you see pictures of everything recently, it seems like Rubio is closer to the king. And I don't normally do criminology on our own country, but given Trump's ego, being closer to him in pictures and stuff actually is an indication of something.
Well, I feel like the way that all the things are going on internationally, at least one of those threads is going to backfire on Rubio, and I don't think that's going to last forever.
No, I feel like most of these people have 1,000 little bombs to go off, and particularly with like, NATO sending 6 countries' forces to Greenland to potentially defend against us, including the UK. With yes, they're still kowtowing to Trump as much as an inordinate degree, but you did have NATO commanders saying they'd seize every military base the U.S. had in Europe if it happened. And there are reports of generals, when asked to drop a plan about Greenland, saying flat out that the Joint Chiefs saying we don't want to do that. Now, one thing I'd say is like that latter bit probably can't be true. We know the United States has a contingency plan for invading every single country on Earth. And I don't mean that they would actually do it. I mean, like, we had a hypothetical plans for invading Canada in World War I and World War II, and we probably have them now. And furthermore, today is when we're speaking. I'll just date this because it'll come out about a month later, and who knows what's going to happen in a month.
Yeah.
This is on the 12th of January. We have all the big talk and bluster about Mexico, but also the U.S. is formally allowing Mexico to ship crude to Cuba, despite also having warships outside of Cuba. So who the hell knows?
They did. I didn't see that. I thought they were. That was Rubio's big thing of trying to cut that off.
It is, but there was a conversation between Steinbaum and Trump that went well, and then all of a sudden the U.S. was like, the ships can go through. I don't know how long they'll stay. I mean, but I guess this betrays the point. Yarvin, more than Deneen. I mean, like Yarvin A has proved himself to be a lot more stupid than his bluster back when Mark Fisher was obsessed with him.
I didn't know about that. I think I did at some point, but I forgot about it.
Back before anyone knew who Yarvin was, back when he still published under Minch's Mobug, there are like tons of
because of the land connection, probably.
Yep, it's through Nick Land, and honestly and seriously, Fisher and critiquing these people when nobody knew who they were actually made them slowly part of the mainstream of Republican thought. Be careful who you critique, but go ahead.
Well, I wouldn't give him too much credit there. They definitely had a lot of sway just through like a bunch of different channels.
Well, TL being a big one.
Yeah, but there's also like the disillusionment with rationalism, and those people were involved in that. But yeah, Thiel and lots of other people, but this is like they really. Like you read Yarvin's stuff, which I wouldn't necessarily recommend because it's not very good. And you can tell why people were attracted to it back then, because he was
after the Iraq War, it actually did hit in a different way. I mean, I remember when I first read Letters to a Young Progressive. I think it was right when it came out.
Oh, really?
And yeah, and I was like, this actually does kind of hit if you are watching these neocons do neocon things, and then you're coming out of this American exceptionalism. I mean, the thing about Yarvin is he's bred a bunch of like reactionaries like Arun McIntyre, who like run a Lester McIntyre, Evola, Carl Schmidt into a blender. But all these people were just standard fucking neocons until 2020. Like, and I just think a lot of them, in the last 3 or 4 weeks, a lot of them were like, there are no adults in a room. I saw a lot of them turn to that. Now they're back on defending the dear leader, but I think the cracks are actually showing. Even now, it's just now that there's blood in the water, they have to swarm. And what is happening is, and although predictably, because we live in a very anti-political country, and also most people's ideas are stupid, including the elites. You see strong reactions in the first year where it looks like, there's going to be emerging Republican hegemony. I mean, you remember this with Biden too, where people were like, Gen Z is going to be the most left-wing generation ever. 2024 comes around, they're going to be the most right-wing generation ever. 2025 ends, and it's like, the Democrats are becoming popular again in the midterms. And I'm like, hasn't that been the cycle since, I don't know, the 60s?
Well, I mean, but there is something different this time in like the way that young people are swinging back and forth, in that like this is the reason why post-liberalism became a thing, is that liberalism had in many ways genuinely failed.
Yeah,
for people.
It still has. Yes.
And it's like this, and this goes back to things I've written about before about like that there's a crisis of socialization, of people not being able to be shaped by institutions in the way that, like, Althusser talked about of state ideological apparatuses, that there's a failure of those to operate to socialize people into like the citizens, the subjects, to actually reproduce liberal democratic capitalism. And that comes with a whole bunch of different things. That comes with like the nihilism of like modern society, the like the whole, like the people not being able to the like find, like, get a life, to the total atomization of people from each other. All of those things are connected, and liberalism has no answer to them, because this is um I remember there was might have been Matt Glaciers involved in this somehow. I don't quite remember, but like of one of those dust ups of like, um, some reactionary saying that you need to give people like meaning in their lives, and then some liberal centrists going, well, I think people should be able to like come up with whatever they want, and that's like the people should be able to come up with whatever they want, but they can't right now, because the like the creation of meaning in society isn't supposed to be a voluntaristic thing. It is a mandatory thing, that it was recognized as mandatory in all previous societies. Now, you don't necessarily have to have a particular content to that, but you have to have it. And without that, things sort of begin to fall apart. Um, and I talk about this basically as a crisis of just like, when people talk about a crisis of meaning, I think of it as a crisis of like actually the production of semantic content. Because without civil society, without institutions to be involved in, interpolated by, and to be involved in the process of interpolating others, you don't articulate ideas. You don't have like an orthodoxy or a set of signs and other ideas to draw from to further articulate things.
Well,
So you don't. Yeah.
yeah, I want to push you a little bit, not because I disagree with you, but because I think if we just limit it to state or ideological apparatuses, we do have a problem, because it's a larger problem than that. Like, if it was just a breakdown of apparatuses, other apparatuses could naturally emerge and take their place.
Well,
we're not seeing that. And the reason why we're not seeing that is, I'm not going to use the A word because you don't like it, but that's alienation for those of you who don't follow the debates here. But I do sincerely think that you're dead on when you say there's a crisis of socialization, which means that not only, I mean, you basically, this in and of itself, not dealing with all the external crises we have, you have a crisis of ideological reproduction, you have a crisis of sociological reproduction, and you have a material crisis underlying that. And that's because all the institutions are now too expensive for people to fully engage in, so they engage in them partially. The free ones are downstream of large capital and geopolitics in ways that make them precarious, and their internal bureaucratic apparatuses have expanded to a degree that would make the Soviet Union at its worst blush. And we've been told that was never going to happen under capitalism. That's just blatantly untrue. Like, go ahead.
I mean, this is kind of why it felt like for a lot of people that post-liberalism had a point, because all of its critiques were at like this educated, professional, elite institutions, which are basically the only institutions left that function in society are elite, or not necessarily elite, but professional, educated, educated professionals run them, all of them. The schools,
yeah, even the ones that aren't schools, like
yeah, no, the nonprofits, the news organizations, everything. And this naturally, like, Yarvin gets all this whole idea of the cathedral, of why this group that's all socialized in in liberal education the same way. Why do they all have the same ideas? Well, because they have that same ideology that they're all trained in, of professionalism, of liberal, in particular in the liberal democratic context. And that, like, everybody who's outside of that, even for many people inside of it, this presents all sorts of problems, practical problems, individual problems, and political problems. And this was the promise of post-liberalism. But the problem of post-liberalism is they don't recognize that like all the solutions come from like this period, like are things that were tried before professionalism was a thing. And liberalism,
and all failed utterly.
yes, because they don't recognize their own liberalism and the way that like liberalism failed basically everywhere before professionalism was a thing, except for the U.S. And this is important because it relates back to this question of why is there a crisis of socialization? The U.S. like had a particular civil society with like the amount of like churches and political groups and whatever, all sorts of associations between people that had sprung up basically from its very beginning. And basically, what we saw over the course of U.S. and global history is these institutions like basically slowly dissolve over time, and nothing comes up to replace them. And this is the thing of like liberalism. This is my theory of it. Is that basically you need resources to like create these civil society groups that in order to reproduce themselves, and liberal democratic capitalism will not assign those resources necessarily. It will, like, there'll be some inertia from pre-liberal times, but as that slowly winds down, those like the death rate of institutions is much higher than like the birth rate, and they'll eventually just all die out. And so there's no or go ahead.
I don't think it's an accident that most of the ideological apparatuses, to use your terminology, well, Tercero's terminology, that we built and marketized and corporatized and professionalized were mostly pre-modern. By that I mean churches, civic groups, which were, and I don't mean NGOs here, but civic groups like the Kiwanis or the Shriners of the Masons or whatever, that came out of guild societies. Universities, which are pre-modern. I mean, they're not, they go back to the 8th or 9th century in the West, and like 1,000 years BCE in Asia. So, it's these are institutions that were not fully dissolved. And I often think even Marx was a little bit, I mean, he predicted this, but he didn't talk like, I don't think he thought we'd allow capitalism to get so mature that it would actually be able to fully cannibalize and dissolve all those things. And he also didn't think some of them dissolving were bad, but
well, he didn't. Well, this is one of the big problems of Marxism, I think, is that it came about right before like professionalism fully took over Western societies. Like literally the decades, like 20 years before, basically. And it, like, he grew up in, I mentioned this before a little bit, of how it started in Prussia, and he was like, this is like the worst despotism ever, and there's no way, like, this is a thing of the past, and it's like this is not the future. But it was the future, but not in the particular Prussian way, right? Everyone adopted it once they realized that they could use it to stabilize liberal societies. And because when you look at the French revolutions, all of them involve some defections of the armed forces, and once you have a professionalized military officer corps, you can shut that down for the most part. And
yeah, which I tell people when everyone tells me, like, oh, if there was something in America, 30-40% of the troops support Trump, I'm like, and 60% don't, and very little of the brash really cares. So, even with the Hexeth purges, I doubt that they really care.
Yeah.
So I don't think that means what you think it means. And then when they try to create their own forces, like I've mentioned, ICE or this new DHS, they are so obviously unprofessional that now you have what I like to call the reduction problem. Just like when you cook a soup, right? The insanity, but all the devotion gets stronger and stronger because all the other elements evaporate away. So, long-term, relatively staid conservatives who were probably even sympathetic to Trump won and very much hated Biden and were supporting him in the first few months until whatever happened with Doge happened. The problem that they've had is while the Trump has Mad King vision, all those visions tend to resolve in weaker institutions, and they can't replace the administrative apparatus, and they can't deliver on their promises. So what do I mean by that? Well, it's clear that the tariffs aren't going to bring enough money in to offset spending to really get down the national debt. And why do you care about the national debt? Because, well, if you want to keep, it's not because the government can run out of money. It's because, however, they can run out of the ability to get people to buy their bonds, which would drop them from 4x basically. And once that's happened, the dollar is just paper. Because what you're proving is the full faith and credit of the planet is no longer with you. Sorry, MMTers, you're not wrong in the first instance, but in the second instance, you really are.
Yeah, they are wrong that in the sense that they always think that the U.S. has more fiscal room than it really does.
Right, exactly. Like they draw from the idea that the U.S. can't run out of money because they supply it through, and they can demand it through taxes, to pretend that the U.S. is like an internally consistent autarky where the government's also the only major purchaser, which is not really true.
I have this line in an upcoming article for Cosmonaut about some of the political economy of this, and it's like the Chinese, when they're like faced with the trade negotiations, they actually can embody like the Keynesian maxim of like anything we can do, we can afford. If they wanted to spend more, they could do it and actually use all that excess capacity. But the U.S., the inverse is not true. All the things we can afford are not things we can necessarily do. And this is a problem that not many people have really reckoned with, except in like sort of a crude way of like some of the conservatives talking about the debt 10 years ago. They don't do that anymore. But it's like the U.S. doesn't have the capacity anymore because of systemic underinvestment under neoliberalism. And this is going to create, this is all of the things Trump's doing right now with the Fed, with tariffs. He just announced new tariffs, about 25% on anyone trading with Iran, which who knows what that means.
Who knows how you improve that?
Like, yeah, well, they'll just assert it.
I mean, also, we know they will, but we also know that they're likely to have the Supreme Court, they might serve Trump, but they serve capital more.
Yeah,
and
they might genuinely shut down the tariff stuff, which would be interesting. Probably good for the economy. Well, definitely good for the economy, but we'll see how Trump reacts to that. But this, like, I mean, to go back to post-liberalism for a second here, I mean, yeah, they have no alternative. That's the basic thing. And what is,
they have no way to form an elite either. I mean, this is the other thing I would hear like Arun McIntyre talk about, we need the lions and not the foxes. And I'm like, you have a big fat fox on your throne, you doofus. Like, you don't know how to tell the difference.
Well, it's
go ahead.
I mean, did you read Yarvin's most recent blog about how we need to embrace democratic centralism, or not? We, as in the right,
Yes.
They need to embrace democratic centralism in order to create a party that's on a gamified Silicon Valley app in order to get people to vote to end democracy. And it's just so absurd that, like, because it's really ironic that they are literally like 50 years behind the left in all these debates, because they don't have like, they look at China like, oh, look at that strong democratic centralist party, not looking at the like long history of every failed sect an ML party in the West that tried this exact thing, maybe without the app. I don't know if that'll make that much of a difference.
We have parties trying the app too, though, so it's okay.
Yeah, that's nowadays that they do that.
I mean, this is the thing. One of the things that this is really a case to me is like Patrick Deneen is a smart man. I actually don't think Curtis Yarvin is that smart of a man, but I do think Patrick Deneen is. So
he's dumb like a fox. He knows how to attack like the liberals and the neocons. He has zero self-awareness is his thing.
Right. And it looks to me what they're going to be left with is a bunch of groyper trolls who they're not just not professionals in the sense of going through professional education. They're also not even properly proletarianized, and that most of them have never had a fucking job. And so you're left with this deracinated group of people who are to pull from Joseph Tainter a little bit, my favorite guy to talk about, who are maybe smart in one or two elements, although the CEOs tend to be smart in one key element. I think I often disagree with Ed Zitron a lot, but he is right about this. One of the reasons why the CEOs survive purges and changes of expertise and specialty is their specialty is conning people.
Yeah.
Like that's how they got there.
Mm-hmm.
And so eventually that's all you have left. And between that and financialization of incentives, you have not just enshittification, which comes from, actually somewhat cunning, if vulgar, shifts of collecting rents that Cory Doctorow describes. But you also have enshittification in that you don't really have anyone who understands how to run anything at the head of anything.
Yep. This goes back to like the breakdown of socialization, right? Is that there's like the status quo, the explicit ideologies of like before post-liberalism, before Trump, all of the explicit ideologies were stupid, but everyone was trained and knew their job and knew what they were supposed to do in a practical way. The system reproduced itself.
The system reproduced itself despite the fact the ideology. Although I think, Nico, I want to ask you about this.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things I started seeing even with neoconservatism is a lot of these people started believing their own ideological Kool-Aid, which is something you should never really do.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not seeing people like, oh, you believe Marxism? Yeah, I do. But I'm not trying to fool you guys with some kind of concocted ideology. If I have an ideological apparatus, I try to have it approach truth. And maybe everyone believes that. But the problem that you have is if you have to believe lies enough to sell them to the public, and we saw this with, I think I saw this with the George W. Bush administration. Eventually, you start acting like those lies are true, and they affect your decisions in ways that are disastrous.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder, if that's one of the things. The two things I got from your talk about post-liberalism is where are their elites going to come from? If they think the current elites are so bad, I mean, is it just a counterform of the current elites? Because if you know the deeper history of these debates, if you read someone like Sam Francis, who was talking about this in the 90s, he just thought you get the middle class to produce an angrier, more disgruntled counter elite, but still had most of the same skills. And you would get close to the kind of nationalism you wanted. And while he would admit that he didn't think that white nationalism could ever be dominant in the United States, that it would have a lot of the same things and the white nationalists would be happy. Except for the most genocidal ones. That was Sam Francis and Leviathan and His Enemies. And today you're just like, y'all deracinated society too much for that to work. You're not going to get a mass middle class base like that. Go ahead.
So this is the interesting thing, right? So when Yarvin is talking about creating a new democratic centralist party, he doesn't talk about who's at the top of that party. It's kind of like goes without saying that it's whoever owns the app or whatever. It's literally just Silicon Valley venture capitalists. And it's like, that's stupid. That's not an actual elite that knows how to run anything. You just think that because of
look
like
at
your
Alex Karp. What?
yeah. Well, he genuinely believes that they bought into all that bullshit, and like because that is it. That's Yarvin's whole theory was that like CEOs like is a type of authority that works in practice and whatever. So obviously they should be the ones in charge, and these like Silicon Valley CEOs
It works in
they don't
practice
have the
because half
practical
of
knowledge.
businesses don't even listen to them. But anyway, go ahead. Like,
they are not an elite that can actually run things in that way. And Deneen, I'm not exactly sure if how he articulates how you create this new aristocracy. I get the sense that it's just supposed to be like educated Catholics or something. But there is no real plan from these people, or especially, and there is no real actually doing it of creating a new elite. And they're basically hitting a dead end with that because they don't even recognize really that it's a problem. Because in some sense, the elite is implicit in like their ideas. It's just like it's people. It's generally whoever's like them, right? People in their particular strata.
yeah, it is a projection of I mean this in a non we use narcissism too much, but it is a narcissistic projection of yourself. It's a self-exception where you think you are an aristocrat. So if you had a pit of people who look like you, I mean, to be fair, I would probably rather live in a society run by Patrick Deneen than run by Curtis Yarvin, because I don't really want venture capitalist risk-seeking people with a penchant for amphetamines to be in charge of society. But at the same token, I mean, when they talk about the virtues of these elites, honestly, their under management has it more than they do. And by the, if you look at like I always talk about PMC, and I'm like, yeah, but look at the fire part of the PMC. But then I'm like, well, look at what like liberal managers do. They actually are. I mean, they don't advocate for discipline in general society. This is actually something conservatives are right about. But they are disciplined people. Mm-hmm. Whereas like some of these CEOs and a lot of these conservatives are completely adisciplined people. Yeah. They reflect the society decay that they're complaining about. Look at their base. Like,
I mean, this is also like why like because they don't see any need for for people to actually have that discipline or like think for themselves to do what's right or whatever. They just buying into that cult of the supreme leader or whatever, a CEO, monarch, whatever. The way that actual organizations with a strong executive actually work well is when the underlings are all like trained to do what they know is right and have strong responsibility and all those sorts of things. And that's exactly the opposite of what these people have basically been telling the new class of underlings for the government. That they just need to be do what they're told and not think about it.
I mean, one of the things I was thinking about your article is this point that you made about what could work kind of worked in China, but only through failing. Mm-hmm. Which was the cultural revolution and the collective period that happened after it, which did fail. I agree with you. It utterly failed. I think it may have. My hot take that one other person I know agrees with is the cultural revolution actually probably prevented the Civil War, but it doesn't change the fact that the Russification of intellectuals did produce a peasantry that was able to be proletarianized more easily, and it did more evenly distribute skills across society, but that in dismantling the apparatuses that supported those intellectuals, the state could not function, and thus production could not function, and everything started falling apart, particularly in urban areas. Like, this was doable in communes in the countryside, but if you looked at the chaos it like brought in Shanghai and Beijing, it was not a sustainable way to go about things, which I actually agree with. Even though I think you and I both are defenders of the collective period of China, even though we both think it was not maintainable in the conditions in which it existed in, right? Like,
Yeah.
go ahead.
Well, the reason that I in particular brought it up, right, is because I think that there's some structural similarities between the politics of post-liberalism and the politics of the Cultural Revolution, in the sense that, like,
what they say about what the post-liberals are is accusing liberals of doing.
Yeah, exactly. But it's like China in that period until I guess now is probably like it's a window into the future, because they have had educated professionals not for a century or two, but for millennia.
Yeah.
And that creates like this cultural knowledge among everyone in the society, even like the most isolated peasants, about what these things mean, about what these institutions mean, and what they are. And it's why Mao was able to get so much support for these like Russifications of the intellectuals and stuff, because people recognized that the schools, like getting people to go to a school in a city, was the way to progress and like get a higher class position, which was also kind of against the ethos of what the revolution was supposed to be about, but was also like a continuation of like this ancient kind of practice of the civil service.
I think that's interesting. I think about there's two books by Francis Fukuyama that no one reads, which is the Political Order book and the Decline of Political Order and Decay. They're actually they're not perfect, but they're very interesting books. And he makes a point that he thinks is good, but I actually think is an interesting problem. Like he said, one of the reasons why the West got the way it was is we had a professional class that could not have families because it was quartered off in religious institutions. And I was like, yeah, until Protestants happened, then that goes to shit. And the other thing is they weren't really professionals in that they were an appendage of either seigneury or manorialism, depending on where you were at. And I guess I can explain that for my listeners. They were either dependent on lords or they were dependent on people tied to the land that they were on. So they still had serfs. The long and the short of it, though, is that you had an artisan class that had professional things and guilds, but you didn't have to be educated, and they were family based, and you had the other functions of the professional kind of bifurcated in Europe in the religious orders. And while religious orders existed and had academic functions in Asia too, that was not the primary generator of courtly professionals. To be an aristocrat in most Asian countries, I'm not just talking about China, any of the Chinese countries, but even in like the Shilla dynasty in Korea or ancient Goryeo or any of that, there was a whole class of people, and the Marxists in Asia had to make a decision about whether or not they were class enemies or not. Jusei, for example, decided they weren't. If you don't know what the little paintbrush on the flag of the DPRK is about, it is about incorporating the intellectua and like bringing them down a peg. But they were considered acceptable, whereas the monarchists and capitalists were not. And in China, the intellectual was a bigger problem. I mean, it really was a bigger problem. And as you say in the article, and I'm a little bit hesitant to talk all about it because you haven't published it yet, so people can't read it. But it is very true that like the peasants weren't wrong that these professionals were a problem for them. Like, and the proletariat in China was developing. I mean, there was a proletariat in China before the revolution, but a lot of it got massacred explicitly by the Kuomintang and in the wars. I mean, one of the reasons why the Chinese Communist Party had to say the peasantry was the most revolutionary party, which they did a lot in different time periods, was also because of proletariat was literally massacred and not big enough to be a significant portion of their base. And I bring that up because, like, I do think there's a certain class continuity in China that exists from this collective period out of the Cultural Revolution that doesn't exist in the West anywhere. Mm-hmm. Like, maybe some places in Latin America where professionals are more part of small town life and they're still kind of, organically part of small towns. I've read some studies on that, but everywhere else, professionals are pretty much removed from laboring life. That seems to be ending, but they don't have it's also pretty clear they don't have a means to deal with that. Like, not just liberals, but post-liberals don't either. And the other thing is, these guys don't seem to believe in modes of production are even not even in that sense. Like, they don't even really seem to believe in materialism at all. Like, they're hyper voluntarist.
Yeah. This is they are totally enmeshed in like bourgeois ideology. Yarvin especially. Deneen has. Catholicism is kind of like its own thing, but it is still very much they tried to LARP as like aristocrats, as like aristocratic thinkers, but they're not. They are specifically bourgeois thinkers that can't recognize that about themselves.
In some ways, they're kind of degenerate bourgeois thinkers too.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Because they are like totally cosplaying, LARPing, and they need if they were smart, if they could recognize what they were talking about, then I think that like they would have to be more materialist about it. They would have to think about things like modes of production in a Marxist kind of way. But this is like, they totally believe that capitalism, like all the myths about capitalism, basically, except for like the stupid popular ones about like meritocracy or whatever. I mean, Yarvin might believe some of that, but Deneen doesn't. But they do believe in some sort of end of history kind of idea of capitalism and liberalism, and to a certain extent liberalism, although they won't have been that. And the problem is that because they can't recognize these things about the professionals and liberal democratic capitalism. I mean, because they, like, when Yarvin's talking about the cathedral, he still only ever talks about it in terms of like, he doesn't think about it in terms of like institutions as like the material reproduction of institutions. He thinks about it purely as like some sort of mimetic science of the reason that evil left-wing ideas come out is because they are more structurally able to reproduce within these institutions of power. Almost like a Foucauldian sort of thing. That's totally idealist, totally like not grounded in anything more specific or material. And I think this is why none of these people are going to be able to think their way out of these problems that they're faced with now. And also why I think that there's big opportunities for the left in the near future, so long as like everyone doesn't get like arrested and shot by Trump. To come up with a theory of these politics of like, how can we develop an actual critique of educated professionals in a way that isn't stupid? That would be a good place to start.
I mean, to me, I think leftists have to do this too, and I actually do think a lot of the PMC critiques, unfortunately, are also stupid. They are. Because what they assume, and this is because of the nature of where most leftists are in society, is that the values of the PMC are the values of academia because every PMC person supposedly goes through academia, which A, look at the fire, it's not totally true, and B, in so much that it is true. The problem that you have is the humanities majors are over assuming that everyone acts like the people they know in academia, and that the mind discipline of academia is primarily about wokeness or whatever.
It goes way beyond that.
Huh?
It goes way beyond that, right?
No, I think it absolutely does. Have you read Jeff Smith's Disciplined Minds?
Yes. Yeah, I think that's a great example.
Yeah, that book wakes you up to like, no, this is true in sciences too, and how it affects the way you think. And like, if we had proletarian scientists, they would not think like bourgeois scientists, or even calling them bourgeois scientists is actually not fair. They would not think like professional scientists. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they would be untrained. And we live in an era where, ironically, the technology that is happening down. I think you and I have talked a lot about this, but I think it comes back here. This technology that we currently live under, with AI, the internet in general, is de-skilling us in a massive way, but it didn't have to, right? It could do the opposite if you had people work in a habitat that would train them to use it correctly, and also incentivize against human laziness, which, I know it's always weird to like, socialists don't think about incentives. I'm like, no, it's one of the only things I think about, because I've learned that money isn't that great of an incentive at a certain point.
Yeah, no, I mean, the thing about money is that, like, is an incentive, right? Is that if you're not like pretty good at something, if you're not the best, in a competitive environment, it may not even be worth it to try to do something for money, right? If there are costs involved, and that can discourage a lot of people from even trying to do something, to develop skills.
We've seen a lot of the entertainment industry basically completely collapse for this reason. Like,
Yeah,
no, not just from AI, but also just from like power law. Yeah.
But I mean, if you take the approach, and with this is like the one of the good things about AI is that I've been able to build tools that have been extremely useful for me in my personal life. Like, you can now just build whatever software you want, for your personal use. Basically, I made an app this week or last week, that I can use to edit the web pages, HTML, CSS on mobile, which is kind of there are ways to do that with like developer browsers or stuff, but this makes it easy, and then you can download it as an EPUB, and which is something that I always do for putting in e-reader apps to read out loud. And there's no there's no extension or app that just lets you do that right now, and now I can do that. So it's like these technologies can radically increase your agency, even if they can't necessarily make you a lot of money unless you're running a scam or something.
I mean, the MIT studies actually, when you talk about skilling and de-skilling, and I've been pushing back on this, I'll push back on the asynchron heads. That like it does have use that can make you smarter if you are already fairly well trained in classical ways, which was also true for Google. People like I've talked about this before AI. That like people who are well trained in conventional literacy use Google better than just Google it, because the people you were telling to just Google it don't know how to word the question in a way to get Google to give them back good results, even before enshittification. And I think that's important to kind of know and understand, right? Like, but so the MIT study that I'm thinking about, I can't remember the specific one to cite it on air. I might probably look it up. Was like it does lead to skills and cognitive decline in lazy use cases. It doesn't if you know how to use it well. The thing is, no one's like I have designed education apps for my own personal use or for the use in my department with AI. I have streamlined lessons that I've written and been able to level them up or down in vocabulary based on need with AI. It is good at that. When people are like, oh, you never use an education, I'm like, you got to check it. You can't trust it. But like, if I need to, like, if I have a kid who can't read, I can now level a text down to where it can start to, and we can work them up. Where I could do that manually, and it would take me weeks and weeks and weeks, and I have too many students to do it. Now it takes me 5 minutes. If we had a more Chinese way of thinking about AI, we'd be trying to get it more efficient, which we're currently not, and we wouldn't have to be worrying about this, that, or the other. And people ask, well, why don't we try to get it more efficient? I'm like, I literally think part of it is a developmental boondoggle. Is part of why we don't like the data centers or whatever are making money right now, and inefficiency would cut down on increases the need for data centers. And I know the market's supposed to fix that, but it doesn't. So
when it does, it probably won't be pretty for a lot of those companies, in particular like the Oracle and a couple of those. But it's I mean, there was one post going around I saw that was talking about like how using AI will like destroy your writing skills. And I use AI all the time, and I wrote by myself, not with AI, 50,000 words last year. I keep track because I'm obsessive. It's like you can use all these things and not let your skills atrophy like that, which is there is an aspect of personal choice, but there's also an aspect of institutional incentives and how people are socialized. Because right now, kids growing up and going through high school and college, all of that is just designed to be an adversarial disciplining system. And in that kind of situation, of course, they're just going to use it to get through, and just because it's just about presenting the right appearances, the right signs, the right just to get through it and get a job and live. And that produces de-skilling in that situation.
Yeah, well, I mean, I've talked about this too. Is like one of the problems that you have in Western education is that its two missions are at direct odds with each other, and contradictions of capitalism, blah blah blah. But it is because we have one mission, which is to educate the general public in a way that allows them to be more functional citizens and enrich themselves. That is part of our mission explicitly. And we have a second mission that is totally antithetical to that, which is to sort these people into so that administrators can allow them access to other forms of education, to discipline them differently, to move them further up into the capitalist hierarchy. And while a lot of these post-liberals like, oh, we need to get rid of that, what we see is they've replaced that with nothing too. So if you look at the fates of these people who are not going to college, and yes, it's very early, it's not good. They are not like doing better. In fact, blue collar jobs are declining faster now than they even were. And it is true that during Trump's first term, he seemed to be some kind of conservative Keynesian or conservative MMTer almost, with a populist notion of like reindustrialization, which a lot of like Jacobin magazine would love if it was being done by someone else.
Well, I mean, if it was being done, really. I mean, the economy ran a little hot in like 2018 and stuff because he lowered taxes and they had low interest rates. But it wasn't really, not that much of actual reindustrialization happened under Trump 1 or 2. Biden tried.
Issues that can't really be done.
No, it can't. Well, I mean, here's the thing, and this is like the thing. This is what I'm working on. I'm trying to get this book done this year about the inexorable fall of capitalism. And in particular, the particular stage that we're at, as I see it, is that neoliberalism, as in like typified, idealized within like the US and UK economies, what it did is it atrophied industries, and like it needed to decrease investment in order to boost capitalist consumption.
Which has now led to this K-shaped economy where nothing's being invested in. But go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, this is exactly. I mean, there's one thing being invested in the U.S., and it's semiconductors and data centers and stuff, which wasn't even something they particularly set out to do. It was just a part of making this AI business case. Although semiconductors are a little bit different. There's state subsidies for that. But in general, manufacturing investment has been on the decline, as has been financing for manufacturing. The Chinese don't have that problem. They just increase more financing, and it does it does create like a negative side of the profit distribution. But in the US, we still have that, but we just have it for bullshit startups as opposed to actually manufacturing and goods and stuff like that. So that's basically where we are, and I don't think the U.S. situation is sustainable at all. If you look at the correlation between, I think I might have talked about this last time, between labor productivity and capital intensity, the U.S. is a big outlier, and because we have such low capital intensity for our GDP, and some people like this one of the editors at The Economist have been know that and boast about it. Say, look how capital efficient the U.S. is, as if we're not going to experience the same reversion to the mean that the UK did and had a decade and more of lost productivity. That, I think, is what's in store for us. And I think that'll make these politics of educated professionalism even more acute. And I like the way that it's going now, like this, like the wokeism of academia and stuff. That was always just a part of all of it, and I think it's going away in part because that existed because we needed a critique of capitalism as it revolutionized the instruments of production, as it revolutionized society, and we're at a point of like neoliberalism that it's not revolutionizing things really, and they don't need people making that critique anymore, so they're getting rid of that part. But they're still going to have educated professionals that all have groupthink and stuff. They're just going to run things in a much more boring way, or whoever is in charge, or the whole thing could collapse if Trump fucks around with it enough. Who knows? But I
think this system is going to be given to. I think we can see way beyond Trump. This system is given to creating Bonapartist figures who have delusions that they are somehow pre-liberal and they are maybe ultra liberal.
Yeah. I mean, this is like there is no one is presenting a way out right now of this political problem. And this is a whole, and like China has the same problems too, of like it has educated professionals running everything. That's what the Communist Party is. They are a group of educated professionals running everything. But they just happen to be running it better because they know to invest in actual production. And they don't care about capitalist consumption. So they're not captured by the bourgeoisie as like a class interest in the same way. But the problem is fundamental, global. It is everywhere, of professionalism and the crisis of social reproduction that it's creating, both in terms of atomization, of birth rates, of people like having any sort of meaning in their life. It's all of those things. And until the solution comes from finding an alternative way of reproducing society, of having a politics without educated professionals, and also an economy without them. I want to write for Cosmonaut at some point an article that just says abolish professionalism, or maybe abolish universities and abolish professionalism, or something like that, which I'll get to once I work out my theory of the state stuff a bit more. But it's like that needs to be said and articulated very loudly, I think.
I mean, I think the issue that you have is America does need a Russification. Both the professionals and the proletariat, and I think that's going to make people really uncomfortable, are degenerated subjects, like as groupings.
Well, I mean, the problem is that they're also like the people in the rural areas are also that is the issue.
Right. No, I mean, what peasant? We don't have a peasantry. I mean, like the rural areas are either petit bourgeois or even more degenerated proletarian subjects. And when I say degenerated, I'm not making a moral judgment here. I mean, what you find in a lot of the blue collar proletariat, for a variety of reasons, including structural unemployment, including disability from injuries at work, including poor health care, including bad education. And Kotsky's stuff about the socialization of labor. One of our mutual friends in the Marxist Unity group was like talking about Amazon as if it was going to, the Amazon, whatever monopoly, as if it was going to socialize labor more. And I'm like, there are many reasons not to not say much about monopolization.
I mean, that's something I was hoping like 6 years ago, but it didn't happen.
Right.
Like,
But
never caught on.
no, I have a theory that I do think that we have to deal with, which is the centralization of capital plus the organic composition of capital means that they no longer need to do that much socialization of labor to in a real sense to maintain productive capacity, and thus why would they? Mm-hmm. And to me, I know this gets into an almost idealist framework, and I'm going to admit that ahead of time, but to me it means that like we have let things go so long with a failed left that in the West that the Chinese are I agree with you, are probably going to be the people who win neoliberalism by just being better capitalists and ones that function. And B, we here have let pretty much every sector of our society, and I think it's clear even now in the military and in the upper bourgeoisie and the hot bourgeoisie, that they're all degenerated too. Mm-hmm. Like, I can't imagine, Warren Buffett acting like Alex Karp. Yeah. I can't even imagine.
He's too dignified for it.
Right. I mean, like, what you see is like people who just don't have a sense of social of the function of social reproduction anymore, even mm-hmm. amongst themselves.
Yeah.
Like
here's the thing.
Go ahead.
Is that like we need to figure out a way to address people as like basically purely atomized subjects, and mm-hmm. this is something that's like Yarvin understands, but he doesn't understand that you still need people to think for themselves, because he really thinks everyone's just a herd, a mass of like sheep or whatever. Mm-hmm. But like you need to be able to reach people everywhere and tell them to think about what's going on and to understand it and to be able to cooperate in some way with each other, because otherwise then we're all doomed, basically. Is that there's no hope for society in the long term if that doesn't happen, and because there is no like jump starting like any sort of movement or new way of socialization without this. We have to deal with the fact that everyone is totally atomized and what was the word you were using? Like
degenerated subjects.
Yeah.
I mean, they're collectively degenerated subjects. I mean, like, for example, I don't talk about lumpen anymore. I talk about lumpenization because we see lumpen traits across the entire spectrum of society. So and then I tell people, Marxists, you should be worried about this, because I'm like, they're like, Mao worked with the lumpen. I'm like, but not as lumpen, he didn't. Like what he would try to do is, as opposed to trying to shut them out or fight them like sometimes the USSR did, is they tried to educate them into being proletariat. And it took about 50% of the time. And I'm sorry, but I don't see any of you having the capacity to do that. And what's interesting about this is, in some ways, I was thinking about this also when you talk about the Cultural Revolution. I'm like, you and I are rustified intellectuals in a way.
Yeah, I guess.
Like we would have been, like, if we'd have been born in the 50s, in the 70s, we would have been relatively ensconced in academia if we'd have got there. Now, I don't know that either one of us would have got there because of our backgrounds, but if we'd ever gotten to undergrad, that's where we would have ended up. And like now it's like, and you would think that, actually it is true that for Marxism, this has been good for the popularization of Marxism, but it hasn't led us to be able to do anything. So like Marxism is more popular now because a lot of us are out in society talking to people.
I mean, like they did elect Mamdani, for what's worth. I mean, the whole Jacobin wave that did culminate in something, I guess. I don't think it's enough. I don't think it'll go anywhere on its own. It needs people to take it further. But like, I do think people don't give Jacobin enough credit for actually, like, one, realizing that like the post-structural moment was done after Occupy Wall Street. and actually trying to organize the left into something, which eventually produced the DSA as we know it. But obviously, like now, this is something I talked about in my Flowers for Marx review of like how theoretically, intellectually, like fallen behind Jacobin is compared to a lot of the rest of the left now.
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing when you were a vanguard and at the end of one period, but what you bring about is necessary but insufficient. I mean, one thing I will say about Boschkar that even someone like Chris Catrone, not one of my favorite theorists at all, but will say is like Boschkar was one of the best intellectual organizers of his generation, which is true, actually.
Yeah.
Even though today, right? Yeah, even though today he sounds like a late boomer progressive, he was quite innovative from 2007 to the end of the Jacobin reading clubs. And he was quite good at getting people who otherwise hated each other in academia to at least exist in a sphere that they could write for the public, as opposed to just little academic magazines, and beyond blogs, which was the other place where this was really taking off. But now, one of the things you've had is they've been so successful, but they haven't truly been able to like dislodge progressivism as an ideology. They've just sort of merged with it.
I mean, there is still like antagonism with like Vivek Chibber's periodic interviews, which here's the thing is that he always says dumb stuff in them, but I always feel like the things that people get mad at are the wrong things, and every time he goes viral, it's always he's not like woke enough or whatever, but really he's just getting. His whole theory is just kind of stupid in a whole different way.
People were mad at him the other day, and I was like, dude said that the reason why we needed market socialism is because people don't have incentives to lie in markets, whereas they do in God's plan. What? You should be way more pissed off about that. I mean, like, yeah, I think he's got a bad reading of Robert Brenner, and I'm not a Brennerist, and but y'all, outside of people who really pay attention to proxy battles between Maoists and Trots had through high theory in the 70s, I don't think that most people even realize what the stakes of that were about, except that colonialism bad, okay, which even Cheever thinks colonialism is bad. Like, and I'm like, so do you even understand why people are mad? Like the Maoists are mad because he's saying that capitalism is the primary antagonism, not a secondary one. And for most people, I don't even think they understand what that means. So like, I have deep sympathies for a lot of Maoism, but I'm also like, it's barely Marxism.
Yeah.
Like, I find this I find this very funny because I'm also like with you. I'm like, well, like you guys are mad at the analytical Marxists for the wrong reasons. I mean,
honestly, I think it's just that people. There's this whole genre now that people are calling left slop on social media, which I think like now there's like so it's clearly left slop posts giving like pop explanations for things going on, but it's also
I see this a lot of
whole
TikTok.
Genre.
There's a lot of TikTok that's left slop. But go ahead.
I mean, but it's been a whole genre. I feel like going back decades, you could call left slop, and that is mostly where a lot of this is coming from.
I mean, my favorite left slop is TikTok left slop when someone's like transparently wrong. like blaming the CCRU for Kurdish Yarvin and thus implicating Mark Fisher in neo-feudalism.
Yarvin did not read that shit. He could not understand it if you read it.
And I was like, no. Fisher read him, not the other way around. And Land and Fisher had Brooke a decade before that happened. And neither one of them founded the CCRU. That was founded by Sadie Williams. So, like, it's just like, that was like the blatant one. And I remember commenting on it, and they're like, well, what do you know? And I'm like, I'm literally a guy who published Mark Fisher. I like, happen to have known him, kind of. So it's a funny thing to see where all this has gone. But yeah, I mean, I do wonder about this with the left, though. Like, for example, on one hand, I think a lot of people can't grasp. It was one of the funny things. I had Phil Neal on, the post-communization guy, and we were talking about Mandani. He was like, oh yeah, I would have voted for him. I mean, most of these people are cowards, like, but Mandani, like, at least offers some kind of something that's insufficient but would be necessary. And I'm like, well, I think most of us agree with that. Like when I look at Mandani's plans, I'm like, well, it's like a slightly more radical Bill de Blasio. And you know what? I'm not against that, because the alternative is nothing.
Yeah. I mean, it's like they might actually be managing to expropriate some apartment buildings and stuff. And depending on what they do with that, it could go well or very badly if they don't actually find a way to sustain them in a good way. But that's finally someone actually expropriating something in the United States. My God. I mean, it's like the baby step forward.
Yeah, I was about to say, and honestly, that's one of the few things that bond markets can't fuck up. Because almost all the other plans they can. As I have said recently, I was like, one of the ironies today is you guys who just scream tax the rich, is you do realize that if you tax the rich, at least 11% of every dollar that you got taxed would go directly back to said rich. But and they're like, I've never thought about that. I'm like, yeah, that's what the bond debt does. Anyway, I mean, your other options are to be, I don't know, like some Maoists saying that people should do nothing as ICE. And most Maoist listeners, I know most of you don't believe this, but I have seen it. We should just let ICE do whatever it wants because it'll weaken the American empire. And I'm like, this really sounds like after the Social Democrat, after the Nazis, us talk, and you got to know how that has gone historically, guys.
It feels like, I don't know, something the Sparts would say in the 2000s or something.
Yeah.
I mean, as usual, things aren't going great. But I feel like as I'm looking at post-liberalism, I'm like, these people are literally decades behind where the left is at in terms of actually understanding these things.
It feels like they're speed running the middle 20, which is funny, actually, Nico, because the right's actually already learned this and forgotten it. Like the Birchers were Democratic centralists. In fact, they were the dumb, not actually existing stereotype of Democratic centralists.
And I mean, and that's exactly what they're going to try to do a second time, is the stereotype of it, because they don't understand it. It's always through some like cartoon caricature of what it was, and it didn't work anyway in the West. And so they're like, literally, they don't know the left's history. They don't know their own history. And they're literally running in circles right now because they don't know any of that.
Right. I mean, well, the other part of the part of democratic centralism in the Maoist context that they can't replicate is, and neither could the Maoist sects in the West, you have to have a mass in your party to have a mass line. If you're not a mass party, you can't have a mass line.
I mean, but this is important though. That I think that the left is finally starting to learn the lessons from some of these things. That
Mhm.
these problems of a collapse of socialization happened first with
Yes.
the left in
Mhm.
in the communist countries, and also in the communist parties in the West that had their own civil society associated with them. That they destroyed the civil society in both of those situations from the top down.
Mhm.
And this is the big problem with democratic centralism as it's been classically understood, and why I think it's so important to embrace a pro-factionalist party so that you can have a open civil society associated with your party.
Yep.
Um, Otherwise, you'll just kill it again.
I mean, this is one of these things. Is I am a small d, small c democratic centralist, in that I think we should uh that we should go with the will of the majority and who they vote for, and we should have a relatively centralized party. But I'm also in some ways different from that, and more like, the early first and early second internationals, where I'm like, we got to have ties to organizations outside of the party, or the party goes nowhere. And
Mhm.
this is a critique I have of a lot of smaller DSA branches. This is not their fault, but they can really only do electoralism or these other forms of base building because of their membership limitations and their money limitations. But it does put them in a cul-de-sac. And I have been like, well, you should look at New York, but you should ask yourself, why can't your chapter do what the New York chapters do? And I'm just going to tell you, you don't, even though I don't know how many DSAs are like, I'd say, like, let's be generous and say 10,000. Because I do believe it's like a 10 for the organization or something. That they do have a relatively active mass base and internal party culture, even though they're not a party, even though they can't be a party because of the legal structure of the DSA, blah 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 blah. I know all that very well, but they do understand that it has its problems, and there are factions that I don't like. But if you're just like, well, go join X sect, and I'm like, which one? Okay, the CPUSA has between 5 and 20,000 people, depending on who I trust with their numbers, since there aren't formal ones easily available. But I don't see the CPUSA hardly anywhere. Like,
Yeah.
I know they exist. I know there's card carrying members. I know card carrying members here. Do I see them at rallies or doing anything? No, not
Mhm.
as a CPUSA anyway. I see the
And there is the
PSL in a lot of
PSL.
places.
Yeah.
Yeah. But again, no one knows how big they are, and I know they're less than 20,000.
Mhm.
And they're not really replicable either. Like, so I guess there's the old sects, or there's like the like what 20 Trotskyist, and I don't know what the RCI, or the Revolutionary Communist Organization, used to be the IMT, the Grantite Woodite Trots. They're still around, and there's like, I'm sure there's some old, like the Avakians are still around, but where's everybody else? Like, um,
Mostly in the DSA, right?
yeah, I mean, they've liquidated into DSA, and at this point, I mean, like I've said, like, there's a spectrum in the DSA, sometimes even within the same caucus.
Yeah.
Like, from like, I mean, I don't know how many Dungists are in the Communist Caucus, but there are like communizers and Dungists in the same caucus, much less the same organization. Like, and as much as we can talk about how shitty the DSA is, and it kind of is. It's also, there is nothing else outside of labor unions that we really have that has any reach and scale.
Well, I mean,
Um,
even in terms of like labor unions, even in terms of any other organization in the country, I don't think you can say that it has like it is democratic to the same extent in that it has allows like these different factions within it.
No.
Certainly, no group on the right is like that. Like TPUSA was all just like a top-down like mobilization thing.
It's top down and then vibes. It's like
Yeah.
it's like vibes and the bottom 60%, and then it's really rigid beyond that. That's how most of those organizations worked, even when I was like on the right in my early 20s. It's like
I think that's how most organizations work, period, in the country.
Vibes, and some like closed door leadership that you might have some say in, you probably don't unless you're on the board.
And
good luck getting on the board. Yeah. And they do degenerate and cannibalize themselves. You want to talk about institution that even right wingers are talking about decaying at the very time it seems to have won, the Heritage Foundation.
Oh yeah,
it's hemorrhaging internal people. And
because there's nothing left. There's no like the whole purpose of it was to produce ideology, but you can't anymore. There's no point. It's just whatever Trump says.
Right. I mean, so you have people, liberals who go, they got Project 2025. I'm like, yeah, but they also didn't. I mean, like the people who want to ban porn and are pushing for porn bans at the state level are also bringing in more OnlyFans models than any other thing and visas. I mean, like, I don't know, this, like, even as a synthetic ideology, it's like, it's transparently bullshit. And and the thing is who's going to be attracted to that?
Nobody really. Nobody of any conviction,
right?
Which is what I was talking about with like Louis Philippeism. I mean, Trump is a Bonaparte figure, but these people were built for like trying to justify someone, right? And that's not necessary anymore. It's, I mean, if it, I don't know, it's all pointless now.
Yeah,
the whole apparatus they created.
Well, Nico, when this comes out, send it to me if it comes out. If your article comes out before I release this will be released at the end of February. Where can people find your work?
So they can read my writings at Prehistory of an Encounter on Substack. I have a Twitter and a Blue Sky, and I usually have stuff in Cosmonaut, and hopefully this will come out of Palladium. We'll see if they publish it. I don't know. If they don't, I'll see if I can get it published somewhere else, because I want, in particular, some post-liberal people to read it. Is the point?
Yeah, so, they wouldn't read it in Cosmonaut.
No, they wouldn't.
But yeah, it's good to have you on. And it's good to talk about where we are because the one thing I will say is the left has not been able to dethrone the Democratic center, and we get captured by it all the time. But our opposition is in shambles by winning.
Yeah.
I just like when winning is one of the worst things that can happen to your ideology. Perhaps it wasn't working. But anyway. Thank you for coming on, and you'll be back again. I have like 4 other topics we've talked about covering, so I'll probably talk to you in about a month and a half.
Sounds good.